Cross-cultural diversity and inclusion. This is Dr. Amina Ali. You're at video 5 of the series, and we are talking about small acts of inclusion, welcoming diversity. And this is going to be the last video of the series, but not the last video of this conversation, because we're gonna mix it up a bit, and we're gonna cause conversation to happen in this video. And I hope I do it the right way so that we can see the greater concepts of how we use our words. So today's video is going to be Sex in the City, the block that bias lives on. Uh-oh. Do you live next door to bias? Do you live in the house of bias? Are you a landlord of bias? Or do you just rent space in that bias? Let's take a look at that. Okay, so we're going to use terms that are not normally used in most communities. Certain communities are going to recognize these terms, and certain communities are going to be like, what is she talking about? But we're going to use it inclusively to show inclusion, that the terms can be used differently and mean similar things. Okay, so we're going to use a little inclusion in our diversity of speaking today. Let's see if we pick it up. All right. We live in a very heteronormative environment, and that means that's the concept and actions, institutions, and ideologies that we assume heterosexuality is our normal sexual orientation. Now, I would say about 90% of the world believes that, but the other 10% may feel as though a heteronormative society is a bias. However, when we come into this heteronormative society, we have biases within that, even as heterosexuals. Let's take a look. In this binary gender system, which is male and female, binary to gender system, saying that there's only male and female. Okay, there is. I mean, when a baby is born, the physicality says male or female. Now, the binary gender system is the fulcrum for the heteronormative environment. But we also know that there's other people in this environment that we share. And the biases are based on religion or spirit, cultural tradition, nature versus nurture, or our experiences in life. These are things that we take for granted and say that these are the norm because the majority of people are doing it. This is also saying that this is a good thing because it is some written scripture or text that says that this is what it is that we should do. But is there a bias there? And as we mentioned, do we rent space in that bias, or are we the landlord of the house of bias? Are we looking at these and saying that we're right and you're wrong, or that you are people maybe not at the same level of understanding of things that we are? Are you just taking your likes and dislikes and saying that this is a truth and everybody needs to agree to it because it makes me comfortable? Or is there valid points of contention that we actually can argue to either change the mind or help them to see life a little differently? Where we are in this bias is helping us to understand where we need to grow out of. In order to heal from bias, there is a maturity that has to happen. Remember, we talked about maturity had nothing to do with age. It had to do with wisdom. And our biases come because of the lack thereof. Case in point, we have a term called misgendering. And misgendering is a term used to describe the process in which people categorize other people's gender based on perceived morphologies without regard to how that person self-identifies. Okay? So we're going to say that you not knowing that person, whether male or female, you're just going to say something about them. You see their hair done a different way, or you see their social status done a different way, or maybe their family is orientated a different way. Maybe there's the man that goes to work and the woman, the woman that goes to work and the man that stays home. So we misgender and we say, oh my goodness, that this is a weird family because she's the breadwinner and he stays at home. How feminine is he? And we throw those terms out there because we associate what we believe as truth into what we assume that they should know or practice. That bias is really deep. We do it often. Case in point, sexual orientation. This concept describes the idea that people have an intrinsic and enduring or continuing attraction to people of a particular gender and or sex. Now, we women do this all the time. We have a sexual orientation that we have. Now, this describes a gender or sex, but we do it as women. We have a bias toward something or someone. Society in whole understands that the African American community has a bias toward light-skinned people. We say that it's almost like light is right and we have an affinity to that more European, more mulatto look. And we say that within our community because within our community, there is people that get things by default. They kind of get it haphazardly because of what they look like. They get attraction, they get attention, they get likes, they get people to want to be in their circle based on what they look like. They could be a heathen on wheels, but because of what they look like, this orientation that they have based on their gender, based on what they look like, because it is male and female, light-skinned males and females, we tend to think that they are beautiful. But we get a little chocolate drop that has more melanin than we can probably shake a stick at, and we just say, oh, that baby's cute, with no emotion and very low affect. Why is that? The orientation there, based on our genders, is saying that we have a right and wrong. But why isn't everyone beautiful? Why isn't the beauty seen in the action instead of in the physicality? And I've seen this in action. I've seen children that were light skin or high yellow or red bone or whatever the term is. And they are held to a higher standard, and they are excused by a lot of things, and they're enabled in their continuing thinking that they can get things just by asking, or they're entitled. And it is ruined who they are, because now when you say no, it's almost a curse word. And this orientation that we put ourselves in based on male and female is saying that this is something that is okay. And we perpetuate that and keep doing that. Then we set up a bias for them in life because they grow up thinking that this is the norm. This is that normative that they need to incumbent. No. I have to hurt your feelings on saying that, because no, we cannot use that as a truth. That is a grand bias based on what we look like and what it is that we assume based on the normative that we've accepted in life. That is the basis of bias, and that's the block that bias lives on. Last one, sexual identity. Now, this term in its definition is a term that describes the identification of groups of people who have members of society that are based on various dimensions of their sexual and social lives, such as desires, feelings, practices, fantasies, and expectations. This is who they identify with. Now, this goes along to a girlfriend conversation. This is when she says that I identify with women that like beards. I'm one of those women. If a man is clean cut and maybe has a bow tie on and it's got that full beard that's manicured and tapered and just looking really nice, I identify with attraction with him. I look at him twice. And that's because I identify with those things that are comforting and appealing to me. Now, doing that is not negating someone that has a clean face and maybe has long hair. This is saying that the identity that we have, or the identity that we take on, prefers that. There's nothing wrong with that type of bias, because that's a preference, not a rule of engagement. That's not saying that any man that doesn't have it is not attractive. No, that's just saying I prefer, I identify with that preference. Now, in my sexuality, that helps me to know what I look at. Now, am I going to negate a blessing based on what someone looks like? No, we just talked about that in orientation. You can't negate somebody based on what they look like. You have to appreciate the blessing in who they are in their diversity based on their diversity. Now, what does that mean? That means that just because someone is clean shaven and has long hair doesn't mean they can't teach me something. Just because you are a male and I'm attracted to men doesn't mean that a woman can't be attractive to me. She can be attractive. She can have something on that I'm like, well, wow, that's really nice. She can also say something that really just makes me think. She can also be somebody that is my motivator. Every time I see her, I'm just pumped up and I'm just ready to go. That's attractive to me, because that attraction, unlike a sexual attraction, is something that draws me to view. Our biases are based on what it is that we perceive it to be based on our learned behavior. But that doesn't mean that that's how we need to term it when we use it. Bias is also something that we can change, edit, alter, and delete on call. These are some things that we need to look at and think about when we welcome diversity, because bias can be an ill that we need not suffer from. That dis-ease doesn't have to be a part of us. Until we meet again, know that each and every one of you is the best example of what the world needs. So let's be good to each other.